Mind if I try? She said it quietly, almost gently, like she was asking to borrow a pen. The laughter that followed was immediate, loud. The kind of laughter that isn't really about something being funny. It's the kind that says you don't belong here. Commander Daniel Reynolds didn't even turn around to look at her. He just shook his head and kept walking. That was his first mistake. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with me for a while, you already know we don't do ordinary stories on this channel. Before we go any further, I want to invite you to subscribe and follow Emily's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that morning on Coronado. The call came in at 6:47 in the morning. Range Officer Lieutenant Marcus Webb had been awake since 4, running through the day's schedule on his tablet, triple-checking weather windows and ammunition inventory, doing the thing range officers do when they can feel in their bones that a day is going to be complicated. The wind off the Pacific had been erratic all week. Temperature inversions. Humidity swings that would make long-range ballistic calculations a moving target in every sense of the phrase. It was going to be a difficult day for the shooters on the line, and Webb had already mentally prepared himself for the complaints. How was not prepared for the phone call? Webb. He pressed the phone against his ear with one hand and kept scrolling through the schedule with the other. Marcus. The voice on the other end belonged to Admiral Thomas Hargrove, and the sound of it made Webb set his tablet down. Hargrove never called before 7. Hargrove barely called at all. He sent emails, sent aids, sent memos. A direct phone call before 7 in the morning meant something was wrong or something was about to be. I need you to accommodate a walk-on at the range today. Webb blinked. A walk-on, sir. Civilian, female. Name is Carter. Emily Carter. Sir, we're running qualification assessments today. The range is closed to observers. Policy is, I know the policy, Marcus. Hargrove's voice was quiet and final. The kind of quiet that outranked policy by several pay grades. I'm telling you to accommodate her. 1 shot. Give her 1 shot, then process her out politely, and that's the end of it. Can you do that? Webb wanted to ask a dozen questions. He asked none of them. Yes, sir. Good. A pause. Then Hargrove said something Webb didn't expect. And Marcus, be respectful. Whatever happens out there, you be respectful. The line went dead. Webb stood in his office for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand, trying to figure out what a civilian woman walking onto a SEAL qualification range could possibly mean, and why an admiral was calling before sunrise to arrange it. He didn't figure it out. He got dressed and went to the range. Emily Carter arrived at 8:15. Webb watched her from across the parking area. She drove a truck that had seen better decades, a faded blue Ford with Montana plates and a rear window that had been replaced at some point with something that wasn't quite the same shade of glass. She stepped out and stood for a moment in the parking lot, looking toward the range facility with an expression that Webb couldn't immediately read. It wasn't nervousness. It wasn't awe. It was something more internal than either of those things. Like someone looking at a door they've been thinking about opening for a very long time. She was young. 27, Webb would later learn, though she carried herself with a stillness that belonged to someone older. She wore dark cargo pants, worn leather boots that had put in serious mileage, and a simple canvas jacket the color of pine bark. No insignia. No gear bag with a manufacturer's logo. Just a hard-sided rifle case, unmarked military spec foam. Inside he'd see later carried easily in one hand, like she'd been carrying it her whole life, which it would turn out she had. Webb walked over to meet her. Ms. Carter. She turned and looked at him directly. Her eyes were dark brown, steady in the way that made you feel like she was actually seeing you rather than just looking at you. Lieutenant Webb. Yes, ma'am. Admiral Hargrove asked me to. I know. She didn't say it rudely. She just said it like she'd already moved past the administrative layer of this conversation. I appreciate it. I know this is irregular. Can I ask what brings you out here today? She looked back toward the range. I'd like to take a shot, she said. 1 shot. That's all I'm asking for. Webb nodded slowly. The range is running qualification assessments this morning. Commander Reynolds is here personally. Something moved across her face at that name. Not anger, not fear. Something older and more complicated than either. I know that too. Webb studied her for a moment. Can I ask, are you a competitive shooter? Do you have any... I'm a wilderness rescue instructor, she said. Out of Billings. I teach survival courses, wilderness medicine, that kind of thing. She paused. My father was the one who taught me to shoot. Who was your father? She looked at him for the first time with something that might have been sadness just at the edges. Michael Carter, she said. He was a SEAL. Marcus Webb knew that name. He wished in that moment that he didn't. Commander Daniel Reynolds was a man who had built his identity around a number. 2,847 yards. He would be the first to tell you that wasn't the whole truth. He'd say the record was just a byproduct, just a data point, just the result of 23 years of training and sacrifice, and a level of discipline that most human beings couldn't sustain for a week, let alone a career. He would say he didn't care about the number itself. He'd been retired for 3 years, teaching at the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, consulting on doctrine, living with his wife in a house near the water in Coronado, that he'd bought the year he hung up his career. He would say all of that. But he drove to the range every single time qualification assessments ran. He sat in the observation position with a coffee and watched the scores come in. And every single time a number went up on the board, he checked it against his own. 2,847. Still there. This morning had already been notable before the woman arrived, because Senior Chief Petty Officer Jason Ramirez had put up a number that was the closest anyone had come in 4 years. 2,791 yards, third attempt, conditions deteriorating. Ramirez had walked off the line with his jaw tight and his eyes somewhere between pride and exhaustion, and Reynolds had found him behind the equipment shed, alone, staring at his hands. Good shooting, Senior Chief. Ramirez looked up. He was 29 years old, built like something architectural, with hands that looked too big to do the precise work they were capable of. Thank you, Commander. Coming from you, that means... You were fighting the wind wrong, Reynolds said. Second shot. You were compensating for where it was instead of where it was going. You need to lead the air same as you lead a moving target. Ramirez absorbed this. Yes, sir. Try again Thursday. The forecast says the inversion's clear in the afternoon. You'll have better conditions. He patted the young man on the shoulder and turned to walk back toward the observation deck. That was the moment he saw her. A young woman, civilian clothes, hard-sided rifle case, walking across the range facility with Lieutenant Webb moving to intercept her from the parking lot. Reynolds watched them talk. He watched the way she stood, weight evenly distributed, no fidgeting, no looking around. He watched the way she handled the case. He watched the way she looked toward the range itself, not with excitement or anxiety, but with a kind of settled focus. Something about it made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't immediately name. He walked over. Lieutenant Webb, his voice carried. Everyone within 20 yards snapped to attention by instinct. Webb turned, came to attention, and the woman didn't. She just turned and looked at him with those steady brown eyes. Commander Reynolds. Webb's voice was carefully neutral. This is Ms. Emily Carter. She's a walk-on, I heard. Reynolds looked at Emily. He was 6'2", silver-haired, with the kind of face that 23 years of operational life engraves rather than ages. He had a way of looking at people that had made hardened men reconsider their choices. He turned it on Emily now, measuring, assessing. You're here to shoot. I am, she said. What's your background? Wilderness rescue, Montana. Reynolds waited, clearly expecting more. She didn't offer more. Any military experience? No. Competitive shooting? No. He looked at the case in her hand and, what are you carrying? She set it down, unlatched it, and tilted the lid back. Inside, nested in foam, was a rifle that Reynolds recognized immediately because he had fired thousands of rounds through the same platform. A Barrett MRAD bolt-action precision-built Lapua Magnum fitted with a Schmidt and Bender scope that costs more than most people's cars. The rifle was not new. The stalk showed wear, the kind that comes from years of field use, not careless handling. The action had been worked to a smoothness that only comes from repetition in the thousands. Reynolds looked at the rifle, then at the woman. "Where did you get this?" "It was my father's." "Who's your father?" The range had gotten quieter around them. The other shooters, the instructors, the range safety personnel, they were all doing that thing people do when they want to watch something without appearing to watch it. Emily looked at Reynolds with an expression that carried something he couldn't quite categorize. "Michael Carter," she said. The silence that followed was of a completely different quality than everything that had come before it. Reynolds went very still. The muscles along his jaw tightened. His eyes, which had been assessing and professional, changed. Not dramatically. This was a man trained to keep his face controlled, but something shifted in them. A door opened somewhere behind them that he'd been keeping locked. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, one of the junior instructors, a young operator named Torres, who had no idea what weight had just landed in the air, laughed. It was short and reflexive, the laugh of someone who doesn't know the rules of the room they've just walked into. "With respect, Commander," Torres said, grinning at his partner standing next to him. "Should we set her up at the 50-yard range? Give her something more." "Torres." Reynolds's voice was flat and absolute. "Sir." "Shut up." Torres shut up. Reynolds looked at Emily for another long moment. Something was happening behind his eyes that Webb, watching carefully, couldn't fully read. Then Reynolds looked away toward the range and spoke in a voice that was professionally controlled, but had an edge underneath it, like something under pressure. "Set her up," he said. "One shot. Everything by the book." The word traveled fast. By the time Emily was set up at the primary firing position, there were more people around than there should have been for a standard qualification assessment. Word had moved through the facility, the way word moves in tight communities, not announced, just propagated one person to the next. The message stripped down to its essential strangeness. "There's a civilian woman out here. Michael Carter's daughter. Reynolds knows who she is. She's going to shoot." The operators who gathered kept a professional distance. These were not people who crowded around spectacles, but they watched. They watched the way she set up, methodical, unhurried, not performing for the audience, not acknowledging it either. She unfolded a small notebook and opened it to a page dense with handwritten numbers, then looked at it and looked at the conditions and made adjustments to her scope with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made those adjustments 1,000 times before. Senior Chief Ramirez stood with his arms crossed and his head slightly tilted. He'd grown up in Texas, started shooting at 8, been selected for SEAL training at 22, and was widely regarded as the most talented long-range shooter in his class. He watched Emily work through her setup and felt something he hadn't expected. Respect. Not awe. Not yet. Just the recognition of a craftsperson from another craftsperson. "She knows what she's doing," he said quietly to the man standing next to him. His partner, a petty officer named Delgado, squinted toward the firing line. "She hasn't shot anything yet." "She knows what she's doing," Ramirez repeated. Torres was standing nearby, no longer laughing. He'd heard the name Michael Carter from an older instructor shortly after Reynolds had shut him down, and the history that came with it had recalibrated him significantly. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching in silence. Webb stood near the range control station watching Reynolds. Reynolds hadn't moved. He was standing 15 yards back from the firing line, arms at his sides, watching Emily make her final preparations with an expression that Webb could now read slightly better than before. He looked like a man who was afraid of something. Not afraid she would fail. Afraid of what it meant if she didn't. Emily lay prone behind the Barrett. She had not asked for spotters. She had not asked for the official range conditions report, though it was standard protocol to provide one. She had looked at the wind flags. There were 12 of them arrayed at intervals out to the target, and she had watched them for 4 minutes without saying anything or writing anything down, just watching. And then she had made a single final adjustment to her scope, settled into position, and become very still. The target was at 2,700 yards. Not the record distance. Just a starting point set by the range officers, who had fully expected this to be a short, polite exercise, followed by a quiet exit. Emily took 3 slow, measured breaths. The range went silent in the way that firing ranges go silent, not completely, because the wind was still moving, and the flags were still turning, and somewhere in the distance a boat was moving through the channel, but the human sound stopped. Nobody spoke. Nobody shifted weight. It was the silence of collective attention of 20-something trained observers, all recognizing at the same moment that something was happening on that firing line that they didn't fully understand yet. She exhaled halfway. She squeezed the trigger. The Barrett fired that enormous authoritative bark of a .338 Lapua that you feel in your chest as much as you hear with your ears. And Emily rode the recoil with the ease of something she'd done so many times it had become part of her body's language. 2 seconds of silence. 3. 4. Then the steel plate at 2,700 yards rang. Dead center. The spotting scope operator, a young petty officer who'd been watching the target through a 50-power optic, pulled back and said very quietly, "Hit, center mass." Nobody cheered. Nobody reacted the way they would have reacted for one of their own. The silence just changed quality. It went from anticipatory to something else, something more careful, more awake. Reynolds didn't move, but Webb saw his hands down at his sides close slowly into fists. Then Emily's voice came from the firing line, calm and matter-of-fact. "Can we move it back?" Torres looked at Ramirez. Ramirez looked at Webb. Webb looked at Reynolds. Reynolds looked at no one. He was looking at the woman on the firing line. Then he looked at Webb and gave a single small nod. 2,800 yards. 53 yards short of the record. A distance that had ended dozens of careers and thousands of attempts over 3 decades. A distance that even Reynolds's best students had approached and retreated from with their records intact and their confidence somewhat less so. The target sat far enough downrange that without the spotting scope, it was not visible to the naked eye in the shifting morning light. The wind had picked up. The temperature had dropped 2 degrees since Emily first settled onto the line. The flags were moving in competing directions at different range intervals, a condition that experienced snipers called the argument, because the wind at every position was disagreeing with the wind at every other position, and calculating the aggregate effect on a bullet, traveling 2/3 of a mile through that disagreement, required not just skill, but something closer to intuition that had been built from so many repetitions. It had stopped being intuition and started being knowledge. Emily looked at the flags for 3 minutes. She opened the notebook again, the old one, the one Webb would later learn had been written by Michael Carter during the last year of his life, filled with observation notes and range calculations and small philosophical observations about the nature of patience and distance. And she read something on a page near the middle. Just read it quietly, without moving anything but her eyes. Then she closed the notebook and looked at the target. Ramirez, watching through his own binoculars, said under his breath, "She's going to do it." "Delgado, you don't know that." "Yes," Ramirez said without any doubt in his voice at all. "I do." Emily settled back into position. The whole range waited. Reynolds had moved finally 10 yards closer to the firing line, though he'd done it without appearing to do it the way experienced operators move through space. He was close enough now that he could hear her breathing if the wind went still. She fired. The sound rolled out across the range. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, clang. The steel sang. "Thon-ned." Someone behind Webb said, "Oh my God," very quietly. Someone else didn't say anything, but made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Ramirez lowered his binoculars and stood very straight, and something in his face looked like what religious people look like when they see something they weren't sure they believed in actually appear in front of them. Torres turned away. I wasn't sure why. He turned away and looked at the fence and took a breath, and when he turned back, his face was controlled again, but the change that had happened in him was permanent. Webb looked at Reynolds. Reynolds was looking at Emily Carter. She was already up from the firing line, back on one knee, looking at the flags again. Not celebrating. Not acknowledging the observers. Just working. She turned her head and found Webb's eyes. The record distance," she said. "Can you set it?" Webb opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned to Reynolds. Reynolds stood in the silence for a long moment. Then, "Said it," he said. His voice was low and rough in a way that wasn't anger. 2,847 yards. 2,847 yards. The number on the board. Reynolds's number. The number he had fired in a competition held 31 years ago during an inter-service shooting trial in conditions that happened to be nearly perfect low-wind stable temperature, optimal visibility. He had fired it and known in the moment that the shot was true, and the plate had rung, and the number had gone up, and it had never come down. He had spent 31 years watching people try. He had spent 31 years knowing in the private part of himself he didn't let anyone see that the number wasn't just about the shooting. It was about everything, about the career, about the sacrifices, about the men who hadn't made it home, and the missions that never got written down, the ones that cost more than anyone was compensated for in rank or decoration or official acknowledgement. The number was proof that he had been worth it, that all of it had been worth something. And now, a 27-year-old wilderness instructor from Montana was lying prone behind a rifle that had belonged to a man Reynolds had tried very hard not to think about for 25 years, and the entire range was watching, and Reynolds was standing there with his hands at his sides, and the private part of himself, the part he didn't let anyone see, was doing something complicated that he would need a long time alone and possibly a drink to fully examine. Emily settled into position. She didn't rush it. The wind was complicated, and she knew it, and she gave it the respect it deserved. She watched the flags. She made a small, precise adjustment to the scope, a quarter turn, then half a turn. Back then. Something else that the observers couldn't identify from this angle. She closed the notebook and placed it to her left. She settled her cheek against the stock. She breathed. In the silence, Reynolds heard her 3 slow breaths, even measured each one a little shallower than the last, settling her heart rate, settling her body, reducing herself to the minimum possible interference between the rifle and the physics that would determine everything. He had done this himself 31 years ago. He had breathed exactly the same way. He didn't know if that meant anything. He suspected it did. She fired. The sound was enormous and immediate, and then it was gone, and the silence that came after it was the longest silence Marcus Webb had ever experienced in his professional life, which had contained a significant number of very long silences. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds for a bullet, traveling at 850 feet per second to cover 2,847 yards, accounting for velocity decay, atmospheric drag, the Coriolis effect, the sum total of everything that the wind and distance and physics were conspiring to impose on the small piece of metal that Emily Carter had sent into the morning air on a Tuesday in November over Coronado Naval Air Station. 7 seconds. And then the steel plate rang. It rang with a sound that Webb would remember for the rest of his life. Not louder than the others, not different in any technical way. Just a sound arriving after 7 of the most suspended seconds he had ever lived through, which gave it a quality that normal sounds don't have. Emily Carter lay still for a moment after the plate rang. She didn't move. She pressed her forehead against the back of her hand which rested on the stock. Not crying, just private, something internal, something that belonged to a conversation between her and a man who wasn't in the room and hadn't been for 25 years. Then she rose, unclicked the magazine, cleared the chamber with practiced precision, and stood. Nobody spoke. She turned to face the assembled observers, the operators, the instructors, the range officers, the senior chiefs and junior petty officers and warrant officers, and all the collected rank and experience of Naval Special Warfare's shooting community. And she looked at them the way she'd looked at everything that morning, steadily and without need for their reaction. And then she said, "Thank you for the time on the range." She reached down and picked up the Barrett and the case. Torres was the first one to start clapping. He didn't plan it. It happened before he thought about it, and once he'd started, he couldn't stop, and it didn't matter, because within 2 seconds, the entire range was doing it. Not the polite, measured applause of official occasions. but the hard, real applause that comes from people who know exactly what they've just witnessed and are helpless in the face of their own recognition of it. Senior Chief Ramirez put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, which was not the sort of thing that happened on SEAL training ranges, and he didn't particularly care. Emily looked at him surprised, the first real surprise she'd shown all morning, and something warm moved across her face. And Reynolds. Reynolds stood apart from the others. His hands were still at his sides. He was not applauding. He was looking at Emily Carter with an expression that was beyond what any professional mask could hold in place. The expression of a man who has just watched something arrive that he'd been half hoping and half dreading for 25 years. Emily looked at him. Their eyes held for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Webb watched Reynolds do something he had never seen the commander do in 3 years of working with him. He nodded. Not the professional nod. Not the command acknowledgement. A real one. The kind that means, I see you. I know what this is. I know what it cost. Emily nodded back, and then she walked off the line. Webb caught up with her in the parking area near her truck. Ms. Carter. She stopped and turned. He wasn't sure what he'd meant to say. He'd moved toward her before he had a plan pulled by some impulse to close a loop that felt dangerously open. That was what you did out there, was... Thank you, she said quietly. How long have you been shooting that rifle? She looked at the case in her hand. Since I was 9, she said. My mother taught me the safety protocols. I learned the rest from the notebook. What notebook? She opened the passenger door of the truck and set the case carefully on the seat, then turned back to face him. She reached inside her jacket and produced a small spiral-bound notebook. Old, the covers soft and dark with handling the pages, dense with handwriting that was precise and small, and clearly the product of someone who had spent their life writing important things in small spaces. He left this, she said. My father. My mother gave it to me when I was 12. I've read every page 1,000 times. Webb looked at the notebook. What's in it? Calculations, she said. Observations and notes about shooting and about everything else. She ran her thumb across the cover. He wrote about wind like other people write about music, like it had a personality, a mood. He wrote that learning to read wind was learning to listen to something that didn't want to be understood. She paused. He wrote a lot about patience, about the difference between waiting because you have no choice and waiting because you know something is coming. Webb was quiet for a moment. What was he like? He asked. From what you know. She looked at the range behind him, at the flag still turning in the morning wind. I never knew him. He was gone before I was old enough to remember. Something settled in her expression. Not grief exactly, but the long-shaped absence of grief that has been lived with long enough to become something else. My mother said he was the quietest man she'd ever met and the most present. She said when he was in a room, he was entirely in the room. And when he was gone, he was entirely gone. Webb had nothing to add to that. Emily looked at him directly. Commander Reynolds, she said. Does he ever talk about a mission called Hollow Reach? Something happened in Webb's chest. He couldn't have named it precisely. It was the recognition of a name that carries weight even when you only know the weight and not the full story. I'm not familiar with that operation, he said carefully. That would be well above my... I know, she said. I'm not asking you to confirm anything. She put the notebook back inside her jacket. I'm just asking if it's something he talks about. Webb considered his answer for a long moment. No, he said finally. It's not something he talks about. She nodded like she'd expected that. Is that why you came here today? He asked. Hollow Reach. Emily opened the driver's door. I came here today, she said, because there was a number on that board that my father would have been able to beat, and I thought somebody should. She got in the truck. She didn't look back as she drove out of the parking area through the facility gate and out onto the road that ran along the edge of the base toward the bridge and the causeway and whatever came after. Webb stood in the parking lot and watched her go. Behind him, inside the range facility, he could hear Reynolds' voice, low-controlled, giving instructions to the junior instructors, restoring order, resuming the day. professional, in command. But Webb had seen his face when Emily Carter looked at him, and Webb knew with the certainty of someone who has watched human beings navigate impossible things for long enough to recognize the signs that Commander Daniel Reynolds had spent the rest of that morning moving through the facility with the precise, deliberate efficiency of a man trying very hard not to sit down somewhere and think about what he'd just seen. And that sooner or later, sooner probably, he was going to have to. Because the daughter of Michael Carter had come to Coronado. She had done the impossible, and she had not asked for anything, which meant Reynolds understood that whatever was coming next was not going to be on his timeline. It was going to be on hers. Reynolds didn't go home that night. His wife called at 6:30, then again at 8, and he answered both times with the same 3 words, still at base. And she, who had been married to him for 29 years and knew the architecture of his silences better than he did, didn't ask for more than that. She simply said, "Okay," and "I'll leave something in the oven," and "Don't be too late." And he said, "I won't," knowing he would be, and they both understood what was really being communicated, which was nothing either of them could have translated into actual language. He sat in his office with the lights off, not thinking. Not exactly. More like waiting for a thought that was already forming to finish forming the way you sometimes have to let coffee sit before it's drinkable. He was 72 hours from retirement from the paperwork completion. Technically, though, he'd stopped doing operational work 3 years earlier, and he'd spent those 3 years believing he had managed something difficult. Managed it well enough, at least. Kept the essential shape of himself intact. Then Emily Carter had walked onto that range. He opened his desk drawer and looked at the thing that had been in the bottom of it for 25 years. An envelope, sealed. His name on the front in handwriting he recognized immediately, and had never been able to forget Michael Carter's careful, precise hand. Each letter placed like it was a data point that needed to be exactly right. He'd opened it twice. Once the year he received it. Once 5 years later when he thought enough time had passed that he could read it without the words doing what they'd done the first time. Landing in him like rounds one after another, finding every gap in his armor with an accuracy that was almost professional. He hadn't opened it since. He sat with it in his hands now in the dark, with the lights off, and the sound of the bass settling around him. And he thought about a Tuesday morning in November, and a woman who carried a rifle. The way you carry something that belongs to you, absolutely, and the way she had looked at him across the range when the plate rang. She hadn't needed him to confirm anything. She had already known. The only question that mattered now, was what she planned to do with what she knew. 40 miles north of Coronado, in a motel room in National City that cost $63 a night and smelled like somebody else's. Long week. Emily Carter sat at the small table near the window with the notebook open in front of her and her phone pressed to her ear. She answered on the second ring, she said. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Rosa Delgado, no relation to the petty officer on the range, who was 63 years old, retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and who had been Emily's primary research contact for the past 18 months. Rosa had access to the kind of institutional memory that doesn't appear in official records, because it lives in people who were there and are still alive, and occasionally under the right conditions, willing to say what they know. "You're certain he recognized the name?" Rosa asked. "His hands closed," Emily said. "Both of them at the same time. He was standing at his sides, and I watched his hands close into fists the moment I said my father's name." "That's not conclusive." "No, but the way he looked at me after the shots." Emily paused. "Rosa, he knows something. He's been knowing it for a long time, and it's been heavy. You can see it in the way he carries himself. It's not guilt exactly. It's more like debt," Rosa said. "Yes." A pause. "Emily, I have to ask you again, what is it you actually want here? Because if it's confirmation that your father's death was covered up, I can tell you right now, you are not going to get that through an unofficial conversation with a retired commander on a naval base. The record is what the record is. Missing in action. That's the official." "I don't want official," Emily said. "I know what official says. I've read official 100 times. I want the truth." "The truth might be harder than official." I know that. Rosa was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed lower, more careful. I pulled some additional records this week. Not anything classified, just adjacent. Personnel transfers, unit assignments, after-action cross-references. Emily sat up straighter. And Hollow Reach was a four-man operation. The mission brief was a direct action targeting a network coordination node in eastern Syria. Classified at the highest level, which is why there's almost nothing in any searchable record. But I found a casualty notification record from the same week. Standard DoD form, incomplete, archived incorrectly, or maybe filed that way intentionally, I can't tell. The important part is that the notification was initiated but never completed. What does that mean? It means someone started the paperwork to notify your mother that your father was killed in action. Rosa's voice was careful and precise. And then someone stopped it. And what went out instead was the MIA designation. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Why would they change it? Two reasons historically. One, because the circumstances of the death were classified and couldn't be disclosed in a standard notification. Two. Rosa paused. Because they weren't sure he was dead. The silence that followed lasted about 6 seconds. Emily measured it. Rosa. I'm not saying he's alive, Emily. Please hear me when I say that. 25 years is a very long time. I am saying that the record has a hole in it, and holes in records like this one don't appear by accident. Emily looked at the notebook open in front of her. At her father's handwriting, precise and careful on the page. At a line near the bottom of the left-hand page that she had read so many times she could reproduce it from memory. The wind doesn't lie. People lie. Conditions lie. Instruments lie. But if you learn to read it properly, the wind will always tell you exactly what's true. I need to talk to Reynolds, she said. He won't, he will. Her voice was quiet, but there was no uncertainty in it. Because whatever he's been carrying for 25 years, I just put it in motion today. He's going to have to decide what to do with it. And I don't think he's the kind of man who decides by doing nothing. Rosa let out a slow breath. Be careful, Emily. I will. No, I mean be careful with what you find. Sometimes the thing we've built our lives around looking for turns out to be a different shape than we expected. Emily looked at the notebook. I know, she said. She hung up. She looked at the notebook for a long time. Then she closed it, lay down on the motel bed without taking her boots off, and stared at the ceiling until she fell asleep. Reynolds called Webb at 6 the next morning. The Carter woman, he said. Do you have contact information? Webb did. The Admiral's office had required it as part of the walk-on documentation. He read Reynolds the number. Did she say where she was staying? No, sir. A pause. Did she ask about anything specific before she left? Webb considered this carefully. She asked if you ever talked about an operation called Hollow Reach. The silence on Reynolds's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Webb counted. What did you tell her? That it wasn't something you talked about, sir. Good. Another pause. That was accurate. Webb, this stays between us. Yes, sir. I mean it, Marcus. Whatever gets said in the next few days, whatever happens, this stays between us. Webb had been in naval special warfare long enough to know that when a commander said something stays between us, what he actually meant was something significant is happening, and I need to control the information environment around it. He also knew that the appropriate response was simple agreement and careful observation. Understood, sir, he said. Reynolds hung up. Webb sat with his phone in his hand for a moment, then went back to his morning coffee, which had gone cold. Done. Emily's phone rang at 7:45. Unknown number, California area code. She answered Carter. This is Reynolds. His voice was the same as it had been on the range-controlled level, carrying authority as a default mode, but something underneath it was different, something pressurized. I'd like to meet. I assumed you would, she said. A pause. You assumed correctly. There's a breakfast place in Coronado near the ferry landing. Locals only, no foot traffic, corner table, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Ms. Carter. He stopped. The pause went 2 full seconds. "Come alone." "Commander Reynolds," she said. "I've been alone on this for 25 years. I'm not changing the habit this morning." She heard something on his end that might have been a short exhale. 9 o'clock, he said, and ended the call. Check-in. I was already there when she arrived. Corner table exactly as specified, with his back to the wall and a direct sight line to both the entrance and the side door. 23 years of operational conditioning doesn't switch off just because you've retired. He had a coffee in front of him, black half-finished, and he was looking at his hands when she walked in. He looked up when she sat down. In the morning light, without the context of the range around him, without the rank and the deference and the architecture of institutional authority, he looked different. Older, maybe. More specifically, human. The silver in his hair caught the light, and the lines in his face told a different story at this distance than they did across a firing range. He waited until the server had taken Emily's order coffee toast, nothing else, and moved away. Then he put an envelope on the table between them. Emily looked at it. Her name was on the front. In handwriting she had never seen in person, but recognized immediately because she had spent 25 years studying the handwriting in the notebook, and this was the same hand, the same precise, careful placement of each letter. Her throat tightened. She did not pick it up. "He gave it to you," she said. "Before the mission," Reynolds said. "He asked me to deliver it if he didn't come back. He was very specific about that. If he didn't come back, not when." Something moved through Reynolds's expression. He didn't plan on not coming back. But he didn't. No. And you kept this for 25 years without delivering it. Reynolds met her eyes. He didn't flinch from the directness of it. Yes. Why? He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. His hands, Emily noticed, were steady. Whatever this was costing him, he was paying it with the discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime refusing to let cost show. Because delivering it meant going through what came with it, he said. There were things I would have had to explain. Things that were classified, things that were complicated in ways that went beyond classification. He stopped. And because every year that passed made it harder to explain why I hadn't done it the year before. That's honest, Emily said. I've been practicing, he said with a dry flatness that might have been humor from a different angle. Tell me about Hollow Reach. Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. That's still classified. Then tell me what you can. He set his coffee down. He looked at the table between them at the envelope. Your father was the finest instinctive shooter I ever worked with, he said. That includes every name you've ever heard, every record holder, every decorated sniper in naval special warfare over the last 30 years. What you did yesterday, the way you read the flags, the way you worked, the conditions. He did that, but he did it in environments that were nothing like a controlled range. He did it in places where the conditions were actively trying to kill you, and he did it under pressure that most people don't survive long enough to accumulate. Emily said nothing. Hollow Reach was a 4-man direct action, Eastern Syria. The target was real, and the intelligence was solid, and the mission brief was clean. We were in and out in 4 hours by the original plan. He paused. The intelligence was solid on the target. It was not solid on everything else. What wasn't it solid on? Reynolds's jaw tightened. There was a source compromise. Someone inside the support network, not operational, not military, but connected, had flagged our movement. Not the mission details, just the presence of a 4-man element in the area. That was enough. We made entry on the target site, and the exfil route was already covered. Emily's hands were flat on the table. Still, we had a secondary route, Reynolds continued. Longer, more exposed, went through a choke point that we'd assessed as acceptable risk in the original planning. Under the new conditions, with the exfil covered, and no time to re-establish comms for an alternate extract, the choke point became the only option. Your father assessed it first. He spent approximately 40 seconds looking at the approach, looking at the sight lines, running whatever calculation he ran inside his head that the rest of us didn't have access to. What did he say? Reynolds looked at her. He said, I can clear the choke point, but someone needs to create a delay at the primary. Then he said, I'm the better choice for the delay position. Get the others out. I'll find the secondary exfil on my own. The breakfast place was quiet around them. The sound of dishes in the kitchen. Somebody's conversation 2 tables over, low and indistinct. He stayed behind voluntarily, Emily said. He stayed behind because it was the tactically correct decision, and he knew it, and he made it before anyone else could argue about it, Reynolds said. That's different from voluntarily. That's your father saw the problem clearly and solved it with himself as the variable. Without hesitation. Without any apparent... He stopped. Fear. Reynolds shook his head. I was going to say without any apparent need for someone else to validate the choice. He just made it. The way you'd close a gate that was standing open. He looked at the table. The 3 of us made the primary exfil on his delay. We got out. He didn't follow. What happened to him? We don't know. Emily looked at him. You don't know or you weren't told. Reynolds met her gaze. The distinction she was drawing was precise, and he acknowledged it with the small nod of someone who respects precision. Both, he said. In the immediate after action, we were extracted directly to a compartmentalized debrief. No access to anything outside the debrief cell for 48 hours. By the time we came out, the official designation was already set missing in action. Presumed lost. Presumed, Emily said. That was the word, yes. Not confirmed dead. No body was recovered, no remains, no... He stopped again. The region was not accessible for any kind of site assessment. The political conditions at the time made any follow-on activity impossible. That's all factual. That's not... He pressed his hands flat on the table. Emily, I'm telling you what I know, which is not the same as telling you what happened. I don't know what happened. I have never known what happened. And that... For the first time his voice moved toward something other than controlled. Just a degree. Just enough to be visible. That is the thing I have lived with. Emily picked up the envelope. She turned it over in her hands. She did not open it. Why didn't you look for him? She asked. It wasn't my call to make. The operation was classified. The search authority would have required a disclosure that the people running the program weren't willing to make. I was a commander, not an admiral. I didn't have the reach. You have it now. Reynolds was quiet. You've had it for some time, Emily said. You've been in this community for 30 years. You know every person with the access and the authority to reopen a case like this. You've had the reach for at least a decade. Reynolds looked at her. So the question isn't whether you could have done something, Emily said. The question is why you didn't. The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable in the way that true silences are not empty but full of things that haven't been said yet and are taking up all the space. Then Reynolds said something that Emily hadn't expected. Because I was afraid of what I'd find. He said it simply. Not with the performance of confession. Not with the structured apology of someone who has rehearsed it. Just the flat, unembellished fact of a man who had spent 25 years knowing something about himself and was finally in a breakfast place near the ferry landing, saying it out loud. I told myself it was the classification, he said. I told myself it was the access, the politics, the conditions. All of those things were real. But they were also convenient, because the thing underneath them was simpler and harder. He looked at his coffee. If I searched and found nothing, then he was gone, and I had to live with what I'd done, which was leave a man behind. If I searched and found something I'd missed, something that could have helped him, then I had to live with that instead. He shook his head slightly. A man can find a lot of reasons not to open a door when both sides of it look like that. Emily set the envelope down between them. Open it, she said. Reynolds stared at it. I know what's in it. Not the words, I've never read it, but I know what it is. It's something he needed to say that he didn't get to say. She looked at Reynolds. You've been carrying it for 25 years. You don't have to carry it anymore. He didn't move for a moment. Then he picked up the envelope, slid his finger under the flap, still sealed, 25 years later, the adhesive still holding, and opened it. He unfolded the single page inside and read it. Emily watched his face. She watched it in the way she had watched the wind flags the morning before, carefully without rushing, reading the movement in things that weren't obviously moving. She watched the controlled professional face do something that professional faces are not built to do, which is receive something that hits at a depth where training doesn't reach. She watched his eyes move through the lines once, then again. He put the letter on the table. He turned it to face her. She read it. It was not long. Her father's handwriting, the same hand as the notebook, the same precise placement of each letter. It read, "Dan, if you're reading this, the math didn't work out the way I planned. That's on the math, not on you. Don't let it ride on you. You know how I feel about carrying weight that isn't yours to carry. Get the team home. That was the job. If you did that, you did right. There's a girl I haven't met yet. Her name is Emily. She's not born yet as I write this, but she will be, and when she is, if you can, when it makes sense, tell her that her father was someone who paid attention. Tell her the most important thing he ever learned was how to read the wind. Tell her he tried to leave the world in slightly better shape than he found it, which is the only ambition worth having. Tell her, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Tell her I thought about her before I ever knew her. The debt between us is clear, Dan. Don't let it be anything else. M." Emily read it twice. She didn't cry. Not there, not in the breakfast place near the ferry landing. That would happen later alone in the way that the deepest things happen privately, when no one is watching, when you're finally in a space with no professional requirements on your face. But her hand when she put the letter down was not completely steady. Reynolds was looking at her. "I should have found you a long time ago," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry." "I know." She looked at him. "I also know that doesn't fix anything." "No," he said. "It doesn't." They sat in the quiet of that for a moment, in the breakfast place where the dishes were moving in the kitchen, and somebody 2 tables over was asking for more water, and the world outside was doing the ordinary indifferent thing it always does when something significant is happening to somebody inside it. Then Emily said, "The casualty notification. The one that was started and then changed to MIA." Reynolds went very still. "I have sources," she said before he could ask how she knew. The notification was initiated and then stopped. Changed from KIA to MIA. That's a specific decision made by a specific person. That doesn't happen by accident. Reynolds was quiet for a long moment. "Reynolds." Her voice was level. "Who changed it?" He looked at his hands. "That would require me to. I'm not asking you to testify at a hearing. I'm asking you right now in this room because you owe my father a debt. You said yourself you haven't paid, and the one thing he asked you to do was tell his daughter the truth." She held his gaze. "Who changed the notification?" Reynolds was silent for exactly 10 seconds. Then he said a name. Emily's expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did the same thing that happens when a calculation you've been running for a long time produces a result, and the result is the one you suspected, and the confirmation is both vindicating and devastating in equal measure. She picked up the notebook from beside her and opened it to a page near the back. She turned it to face Reynolds. His eyes moved to the page. And then something happened in his face that was the most significant thing Emily had seen since she'd arrived in Coronado. Because what she was showing him was a page of operational notes in her father's handwriting, from a period approximately 6 weeks before Hollow Reach, and the name at the top of the page, circled once in her father's hand, was the same name Reynolds had just spoken. "He knew," Emily said quietly. Reynolds stared at the page. "He knew there was a compromise inside the network," she said. "He knew who it was. He wrote it down 6 weeks before the mission." Reynolds looked up from the notebook. "Then why?" His voice stopped. "Why did he still go?" Emily said. "I've thought about that for a long time." She turned the notebook back toward herself. "I think he went because he believed he could control the outcome. He thought if he knew the problem, he could work around it. He thought the team's lives were worth the risk of going in despite the compromise." "He was protecting them," Reynolds said. "How was protecting everyone?" Emily said, "including the person who was compromised. Because if he'd named the source before the mission would have been scrubbed. The source would have been identified and prosecuted, and whatever relationship that person had with the network would have been blown. People further up the chain would have been exposed. It was... She paused. My father was playing a much longer game than anyone knew. And it cost him everything. Reynolds stared at her. You've known this for how long? He said. I've suspected it for 3 years, Emily said. I confirmed it this week. He leaned back in his chair. Emily. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the last of the professional layer. The person whose name is on that page, they're still active. The word landed between them like something cold. Active how? Emily said. They're not operational, Reynolds said. But they're connected. They have relationships inside the community, inside the oversight structure. He shook his head slowly. If you move on this, if you take this anywhere official, you need to understand what you're moving against. I understand it, Emily said. Do you? My father understood it, she said. And he still made his choice. Reynolds looked at her for a long moment, and then the thing happened that Emily had half counted on and half hoped for. She watched Daniel Reynolds make a decision. She watched it happen in real time in the set of his shoulders, and the change in his eyes, and the way his hands, which had been wrapped around his coffee cup, flattened on the table with a deliberateness that was entirely intentional. He reached into his jacket and took out a card. He set it on the table beside her father's letter. There's someone you need to talk to, he said. He was the intelligence coordinator for Hollow Reach. He's been retired for 8 years. He lives in San Diego. He tapped the card. He reached out to me last year, said he'd been trying to find Michael Carter's family for a decade. I told him I didn't know how to reach them. He held Emily's gaze. I was lying. Emily looked at the card. Then she looked at Reynolds. Why are you telling me this now? I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because yesterday morning you walked onto that range and you put a round through a plate at 2,847 yards in conditions that should have made it impossible using a rifle and a notebook that belonged to a man I failed. And the way you did it... He stopped. The way you did it was exactly the way he would have done it. Patient, precise, without any performance. Like it was just the next right thing, and the fact that it was hard was noted and then set aside. He pushed the card toward her. I've been failing Michael Carter for 25 years, he said. I'd like to stop. Emily picked up the card. She picked up her father's letter and folded it carefully and put it inside the notebook in the back where the blank pages were. Where she'd always known something was meant to be written. She stood. Reynolds stood, because this was who he was, a man who stood when something mattered, regardless of what the surrounding conventions required. I'll call him today, she said. He'll answer, Reynolds said. I'll make sure of it. She looked at him one final time across the table. This man who had carried something too heavy for too long, who had just put it down, who had the particular exhaustion of someone who has finally stopped fighting a current they were always going to lose against, and she thought about her father's letter. The debt between us is clear, Dan. It wasn't yet, but it was becoming that. Thank you, she said. For the range, for the letter, for the name. Reynolds nodded. Thank you, he said, for the shot. She walked out of the breakfast place and into the morning. The card was in her hand. The notebook was under her arm. And somewhere between the name Reynolds had spoken and the name on the page in her father's handwriting, something that had been waiting for 25 years had finally irreversibly begun to move. The card said Arthur Voss, retired, former GS-15 DIA. Below the title, a phone number. Below the number, a San Diego address written in pen, added by hand. Recently the ink slightly different from the printed text. Reynolds must have written it from memory, which meant he knew it by memory, which meant he had known where Arthur Voss lived for some time. Emily sat in her truck in the parking area near the ferry landing and looked at the card for exactly 90 seconds. She wasn't hesitating. She was thinking, which is a different thing. She was running through what she knew, what she suspected, and what the gap between those two things might cost her if she moved too fast. Her father's notebook said, speed is for the moment after the decision. Before the decision, there is no such thing as moving too slowly. She called Rosa first. Arthur Voss, she said when Rosa picked up. 3 seconds of silence. Where did you get that name? Reynolds. Reynolds gave you Voss. Rosa's voice had shifted into the register she used when information was reconfiguring faster than she could speak. Emily Arthur Voss was the intelligence coordinator for Hollow Reach. He's been trying to surface this story for years. He sent a formal complaint through the IG's office in 2019, and it was buried inside of 6 weeks. Reynolds said he reached out last year. That I didn't know. Rosa paused. What did Reynolds tell you about him? That he's been trying to find my father's family for a decade. Emily looked at the address on the card. And that Reynolds told him he didn't know how to reach us, and was lying. Rosa exhaled slowly. Okay. So Reynolds just gave you the one person who has been actively trying to blow this open after spending a year pretending he didn't know how to connect you. That is. She paused. That's either a very significant change of heart or a very calculated move. It's both, Emily said. He's not a simple man. He made a decision this morning that was real, but it was also useful to him. They're not mutually exclusive. No, Rosa agreed. They're not. Are you going to call Voss? I'm calling him the moment I hang up. Be careful what you say on the phone. If there's still active attention on anything connected to Hollow Reach, I know. Emily had grown up in the mountains with a mother who was careful about everything, who taught her that information was like ammunition. You didn't discharge it carelessly. You didn't leave it where someone could find it, and you always knew exactly how much you had. I'll keep it to logistics. Emily. Rosa's voice was low and direct. The name Reynolds gave you last night, the name from the page in the notebook. I know. Do you know what that person's current position is? Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Tell me. Deputy Director of Operations, Rosa said. Naval Special Warfare Command, appointed 14 months ago. The words landed the way certain words do, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a weight that is immediately and completely felt the way you feel, a change in air pressure before you can name what caused it. He's running operations, Emily said. He's running operations, Rosa confirmed. Which means if what your father documented in that notebook is accurate, if the compromise on Hollow Reach was deliberate, not just negligence, then the man responsible for it is currently in charge of the same community your father died protecting. Emily said nothing for a moment. Outside the truck, the morning was moving forward with its ordinary indifference. Cars, pedestrians, a gull cutting an angle overhead. The world doing the thing it always does when you're sitting inside something enormous. How long has he been in that position? She asked. 14 months. He was moved from a consulting role into the deputy directorship. The appointment was reviewed and cleared through the standard process. Rosa paused. His name is Harlan Cross. Harlan Cross. The same name Reynolds had spoken across the breakfast table. The same name circled once in her father's handwriting 6 weeks before Hollow Reach. All right, Emily said. I'm going to Voss. She hung up and called the number on the card. It rang twice. Voss. The voice was older, slightly graveled, but immediately alert, in the way that career intelligence people are alert. Not the military alertness of readiness, but the analyst's alertness of constant processing of someone whose brain never fully disengages from the incoming stream. Mr. Voss, my name is Emily Carter. Michael Carter was my father. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone surprised. It was the silence of someone who had been waiting for a specific thing for a very long time, and was now taking a single steadying breath before responding to its arrival. Emily. He said it quietly, like he was testing the name. I've been trying to find you for 10 years. I know, she said. Reynolds told me. A short pause. Reynolds called you. He met with me this morning, in person. Another pause longer. She could almost hear Voss recalibrating. Reynolds sat down with you. Yes. Then something changed. He wasn't asking. He was processing. Reynolds has spent a decade refusing to engage on anything related to Hollow Reach. The fact that he went to you gave you my contact. He stopped. What changed? I shot his record off the board, Emily said. The silence this time lasted about 4 seconds. Then Arthur Voss laughed. It was short and surprised and entirely genuine, and it was the first laughter Emily had heard in the past 36 hours that wasn't at her expense. "You broke his range record. Yesterday morning, at Coronado." Good Lord. He said it almost to himself. Then more focused. "Can you come to San Diego today if possible? There are things I can show you that I can't say on a phone." "I can be there by noon," she said. "I'll text you the address." A pause. "Emily, come through the back. Park on the street behind the building, not in the front lot. I'll explain when you get here." She noted the instruction without asking about it. "I'll see you at noon." Arthur Voss was 71 years old, thin in the way that some people get thin as they age, not frail, just reduced to essentials, like a sentence that's been edited down to what it actually means. He opened the back door of his townhouse before she knocked, which meant he'd been watching, which meant the caution about parking and entry was not performative. He was genuinely careful. He had reasons to be. He looked at her with the focused attention of someone examining a thing they'd been thinking about for a long time. "You have his eyes," he said. "I met your father twice. Briefings pre-mission. The eyes are the same." Emily said nothing. She followed him inside. He had a workspace in what had probably been intended as a dining room, a folding table, 2 laptops, a printer, and walls of organized documentation. Not chaos. Organized. The documentation of someone who has been building a case methodically over years, with the discipline of a person who knows they're going to need every piece to be exactly right. She looked at the wall. She saw her father's name in several places. She saw the word Hollow Reach in capital letters on a printed document with approximately half the text blacked out. She saw a photograph grainy printed from a digital source showing 4 men in non-military clothing in what appeared to be a staging area. She looked at the 4 faces. She recognized one of them, not from memory. From the photograph her mother kept in a box in the closet in Montana, the one she'd shown Emily when she was 12. The one that was taken at some unnamed base before some unnamed deployment, showing a man who looked like Emily around the eyes and jaw, who had his arm around a woman who wasn't in the photograph, but whose absence was somehow visible in the way he was smiling. She looked at her father's face for a moment. Then she looked at the face standing 2 men to his right. She had never seen it before, but she recognized it anyway, because Rosa had sent her a photograph that morning, a current official photograph, the kind that appears on government directory pages, showing a man in his late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and a careful, composed expression. Harlan Cross. Standing 2 men to the right of Michael Carter. In a photograph taken 6 weeks before Hollow Reach. "How was on the mission?" Emily said. Voss, who had been watching her, read the room, said, "He was the 5th member of the operational unit. Not in the mission brief, not in the after-action record. His presence was never officially documented." Emily turned from the wall to face him. "How?" "Because he requested to be inserted as an observer. Senior Analyst, Direct Action Coordination. It wasn't common, but it happened. The mission commander approved it. That was Reynolds, which is one of the reasons Reynolds has been difficult about this." Voss moved to the table and opened one of the laptops. Cross wasn't supposed to make entry on the target site. He was supposed to stay with the exfil transport and coordinate communications. But he didn't stay. He went in. According to the single debrief record I was able to access, which was filed by a signals officer who was running comms that night and had no idea what he was documenting. There was a 5th person at the target site. The signals officer logged radio traffic from a 5th unit number. That number wasn't in the mission roster. Emily pulled out the notebook and opened it to the page with Cross's name circled. She set it in front of Voss. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it. His expression did something complicated. "Your father documented this 6 weeks before the mission. He suspected the compromise. He identified Cross as the source. And then..." Emily paused. "He still went." Voss looked up from the notebook. "Did Reynolds tell you why he thinks your father went despite knowing? He thought he could control the outcome. He was running a longer play." Voss nodded slowly. "That's consistent with what I know about your father from the briefings. He was not a man who thought in single moves. He looked at the notebook again. "Emily, there's something I need to show you. Something I've been sitting on for 3 years because I didn't have a way to get it to the right people without it disappearing into the same system that buried everything else." He reached under the table and produced a physical folder, not a digital file, not a printout, but a folder with the kind of physical document that exists in a single copy because it was never meant to be duplicated. He put it on the table. Emily looked at him. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "From a man named Reyes," he said. "Victor Reyes. He was a contract signals analyst, not DoD, not cleared for the operational details of Hollow Reach, but running communications, support for the broader theater operation that night. He intercepted something he wasn't supposed to intercept. He didn't know what it meant at the time. He saved it because he was thorough the way good analysts are thorough. You save what you don't understand because you might understand it later." "What is it?" "A radio transmission. Encrypted, but the encryption key was standard theater protocol, which Reyes had access to. 11 minutes into the mission, from a position approximately 300 meters from the target site, a transmission was made to an external relay." Voss paused. "Not to the mission communications channel, to an external relay that was not part of the operation." Emily's hands were still on the table. "It was Cross," she said. "The transmission used Cross's unit identifier," Voss said. "The content of the transmission was 6 words." He opened the folder and turned it to face her. 6 words transcribed in a signals analyst's careful shorthand, dated and time-stamped and initialed. She read them. "Carter knows. Adjust the exfil accordingly." The room was very quiet. Emily read the 6 words 3 times. Her father had known about Cross. Cross had known her father knew, and Cross had transmitted that information to whom, to what external contact 11 minutes into the mission while they were still inside the target site. The adjusted exfil wasn't a tactical decision. It was a response to Michael Carter. "The exfil route that was covered," Emily said. Her voice was level. This was the voice she used when something large and heavy was falling, and she needed to be very precise about where she was standing. "The primary route that was already compromised when they tried to use it, that wasn't a pre-existing security failure." "No," Voss said quietly. "Cross made the call from inside the target site. He told someone the primary route. After your father suspected him. After Cross knew your father suspected him." "That is what the record indicates," Voss said. "My father didn't just stay behind to protect the team from a covered exfil," Emily said. "He stayed behind because he knew that if he came out with the others, Cross would have found another way to—" She stopped. She breathed. "He was protecting them from Cross." Voss said nothing. He let her finish the logic herself. "He knew Cross couldn't move against the whole team," she said. "Too visible, too complicated. But one man staying behind in a denied area, officially missing in action that's manageable, that disappears." Her voice stayed level, but something in her face had tightened to a point that was almost beyond what a face can sustain. "Cross didn't just compromise the mission. He planned for my father not to come back." Voss put his hands flat on the table. "Emily. And then Cross spent the next 25 years moving up inside the same community, using the access and the relationships he built on the back of what he did." She looked at Voss directly. "And he's deputy director now?" "Yes. Which means every operation that community has run in the past 14 months, every mission, every deployment, every piece of intelligence that passed through that office, has been under the authority of a man who has never been held accountable for any of it," Voss said. "Yes, that's why I've been trying to surface this for 10 years, because it didn't end with your father. A man like Cross doesn't do one thing once. He does the same kind of thing at different scales whenever his position requires it." Emily stood up from the table. She walked to the wall. She looked at the photograph again. Her father's face. Cross's face. 2 men apart in a staging area, somewhere that no longer existed in any official record. She thought about the notebook. About her father sitting in some quiet corner before the mission, writing in that careful hand. The wind doesn't lie. People lie. She thought about what it meant that he had known about Cross and written it down and still gone. Not because he was reckless, because he was precise, because he had calculated the outcome and decided that the only acceptable move was to put himself between his brothers and the thing that was going to come for them. He had just calculated wrong about one thing. He had assumed that if he stayed behind, the others would be safe from Cross. He hadn't accounted for the fact that Cross would simply wait. That Cross was patient in the same way dangerous things are patient, not because they've decided to be, but because patience is a feature of knowing you hold the authority and the timeline. "Who knows about the transmission?" Emily asked without turning from the wall. "You, Reynolds. Reyes, who is currently living in New Mexico and has been for 8 years under a name that isn't Victor Reyes. And me." She turned. "Why haven't you taken this to a congressional oversight office, AIG outside the DOD chain? A journalist." "I tried the IG in 2019, Voss said. 6 weeks later, I was informed that my retirement benefits were under review for an unspecified administrative irregularity. The review resolved itself when I stopped pursuing the complaint." Emily's expression hardened. "He came after you. Someone did. I can't prove it was Cross directly. I don't have to prove it to know what it was." Voss looked at her steadily. "I'm not telling you this to discourage you, Emily. I'm telling you so that you understand the geometry of what you're dealing with. This isn't a man who made one bad decision under pressure 25 years ago. This is a man who has been actively managing this secret for a quarter century, who has moved against people who threatened it, who is now in a position of significant institutional authority." He paused. "And who doesn't know yet that Reynolds sat down with you this morning." The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. "How long before he finds out?" Emily asked. "I don't know. Reynolds is careful, but they move in the same circles. If anyone saw you at the range yesterday and the word reached the right..." Emily's phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Reynolds. 4 words. "Cross knows you're here." She showed it to Voss. He read it. He stood up. "How long do we have?" she asked. "If he knows you're in Coronado and connects it to your father's name, I don't know. It depends on how threatened he feels, on what he thinks you have." Voss was already moving toward the laptops, pulling up something, his movements shifting from deliberate to efficient. "Do you have the notebook with you?" "Yes." "And the transmission record you just read?" Emily looked at the folder on the table. "Is that the only copy?" "Of the physical document, yes. The signals log that Reyes saved is on a server that isn't connected to any DoD system. It's..." He stopped. "It's what?" Voss looked at her. "It's in Reyes's name." "Reyes?" Emily was already pulling up her contacts. "Do you have his number?" "His current number." Voss read it to her. She dialed. 4 rings. 5. 6. Then a voice low and immediately tense. "Who is this?" "My name is Emily Carter. Arthur Voss gave me this number. Victor. I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to do it quickly." A pause. "Carter. Michael Carter's..." "His daughter." "Yes. Victor. I need you to secure the log, right now. Copy it, encrypt it. Get it somewhere that isn't connected to your name or your address. Can you do that?" Silence for 2 seconds. "What's happening?" "The person in the transmission knows I'm asking questions. We don't know how much he knows or how fast he's moving. I need you to secure the log and then go somewhere else for a few days. Can you do that?" "Yeah." His voice had tightened. "Yeah, I can do that. Emily, the log, the original signals log, it has a metadata timestamp that can't be altered. It's cryptographically signed by the relay system. It's admissible if it gets to the right place." "I know," she said. "Get it safe first. We'll figure out the right place together." "Okay." A breath. "Your father, he was a good man. I didn't know what I was sitting on when I saved that file. When I figured it out, He stopped. "I'm sorry it took this long." "Don't be sorry," Emily said. "Just move." She ended the call. She looked at Voss. "I need to make a copy of everything on that wall," she said. "And I need Reynolds in the room." Voss was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call him. Tell him to come here. Tell him to come through the back." While Voss dialed, Emily took out her phone and photographed every document on the wall, methodically starting at the left and working right. She photographed the staged photograph with Cross and her father. She photographed the printed transmission record. She photographed the partial hollow reach brief with its blocks of redacted text, because the parts that weren't redacted contained information that, combined with what she now held in the notebook, created a picture that was complete enough to take somewhere that mattered. She photographed it all. Then opened a secure cloud folder Rosa had set up for her and uploaded everything. Then she took the physical folder with the transmission document and put it inside the notebook. She closed the notebook and put it inside her jacket against her body. Voss ended his call. Reynolds is 20 minutes out. Good. She looked at Voss. While we wait, I need you to tell me everything you know about how Cross's appointment to deputy director was processed. Who signed off on it? Who was in the room? Voss sat down. He told her. It took 18 minutes. By the end of those 18 minutes, Emily had 3 more names in the notebook, not circled, but marked with a small asterisk. The way her father had marked things that needed to be returned to things that weren't conclusions yet, but were the shape of conclusions in the process of forming. Reynolds arrived at 19 minutes, which meant he had driven fast, which meant the text he'd sent her had come from a place of genuine urgency. He came through the back door. He looked at Voss with an expression that was professional and careful and carried the weight of 2 men who had spent a long time on opposite sides of the same door. Then he looked at Emily. How much does he know? She asked. I don't know the specifics, Reynolds said. I got a call 20 minutes ago from someone I trust inside the command. Cross was asking questions this morning about an unauthorized range access at Coronado yesterday. He was asking specifically about the civilian shooter. He has your name. Does he know about Voss? Reynolds glanced at Voss. He knows Voss has been a problem historically. Whether he connects you to Voss specifically, I don't know. Not yet. Then we have a window, Emily said. Small one. What do we need to do inside it? Reynolds looked at the documentation on the wall. He looked at the folder Emily had put inside her jacket. He looked at the notebook visible at the edge of her jacket's opening. And then he did something Emily hadn't fully anticipated, though she realized afterward she should have. He reached into his jacket and produced a second envelope. This one was addressed not to Emily, but to the office of the Inspector General Department of Defense. It was sealed. It had been sealed for some time. The adhesive had the look of something that had been in a drawer pressed flat for a while. He put it on the table. This has been in my desk for 2 years, he said. I wrote it after Cross was appointed to deputy director. I wrote it because I knew what he was, and I knew what his appointment meant, and I couldn't make myself send it because of everything we already talked about, Emily said. Yes. He looked at her. But also because a letter from a retired commander unaccompanied by evidence doesn't move anything. It gets read and filed, and the person it's about gets a courtesy notification and adjusts accordingly. He tapped the envelope. What I wrote is a first-hand operational account of Hollow Reach, including the presence of a 5th undocumented team member. It names Cross. It states that the exfil compromise was not a pre-existing security failure. You knew, Emily said. I suspected, he said. I had suspected since the debrief. I didn't have the transmission. I didn't have the signals log. What I had was the memory of a covered exfil route that had been clean in our pre-mission assessment and compromised by the time we tried to use it, and no explanation for how that happened that didn't involve someone inside the operation. He paused. I had never said that to anyone. In 31 years. Until right now. Voss looked at Reynolds with an expression that Emily couldn't completely read. Not forgiveness, not quite, but something that was in the direction of understanding. Why didn't you come to me? He asked. You knew I was pursuing this. Reynolds looked at him steadily. Because I was afraid that if I engaged with you, I would have to finish what I started. And I didn't know if I was ready to face what finishing it would look like. Voss nodded once. That was all. Emily picked up Reynolds's envelope. She held it and Reynolds's letter to her father's notebook, the one Michael Carter had written before the mission, the one that said the debt between us is clear, and she thought about the distance between what something costs and what it's worth. About her father standing at a choke point running calculations, deciding that the only acceptable solution was himself. About the notebook sitting in her jacket 25 years of her life, organized around the handwriting inside it, all of it pointing toward this table, these people, this envelope. The transmission log, she said to Voss. Once Reyes secures it, can he get a certified copy to a congressional oversight contact, not DOD-IG, something outside the chain? He has a contact on the Senate Armed Services Committee staff, Voss said. Career staff, not political. Someone who's been tracking personnel irregularities in Nesavbov command appointments for 3 years. That's where it goes, Emily said. The log, your letter. She looked at Reynolds, and everything in this notebook. She patted her jacket. Not all at once, sequenced. The log establishes the fact of the transmission. Your letter establishes the operational context and names Cross as undocumented presence. The notebook establishes pre-mission awareness of the compromise, which means this wasn't a spontaneous act. It was planned. Reynolds looked at her. You're describing a criminal referral. I'm describing what the record says, as Emily said, which is all I've ever been trying to do. Cross will respond, Reynolds said. He has resources, he has relationships, and he's been managing this specific exposure for 25 years. When this moves, he will move. I know, Emily said. But right now he doesn't know exactly what we have. He knows I'm in Coronado asking questions. He doesn't know about the transmission log. He doesn't know Voss and Reynolds are in the same room. He doesn't know what's in the notebook. She looked at both of them. We are ahead of him right now. By how much I don't know, but ahead. She put Reynolds' envelope inside the notebook next to her father's letter. She zipped her jacket. I'm going to call Rosa, she said. She has the Senate staff contact. We're going to sequence this through her tonight. She looked at both men, the retired intelligence coordinator who had been sitting on the truth for years, and the former commander who had been sitting on his guilt for just as long. I need both of you reachable tonight, not on your regular phones. Do either of you have a secondary number? They both did. She took the numbers. She moved toward the back door. Emily. Reynolds' voice stopped her at the threshold. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the assessed professional regard of the range. Not the heavy, carefully controlled delivery of the breakfast table, but something more direct and less managed. The expression of a man who has just watched something be set in motion that he helped set in motion, and is feeling simultaneously the relief of that and the weight of it. Your father trusted the right thing, he said. He trusted his team over the mission. That's in this business, that's the hardest call there is, and he made it without hesitating. Emily held his gaze. He trusted the wrong person once, she said. Not again, not this time. She pushed through the back door. The card in her jacket. The notebook against her ribs. 25 years of distance between a transmission signal and the truth, and the gap was closing with every step she took toward her truck. Cross had her name. He didn't have the notebook, not yet. Rosa answered on the first ring. He moved faster than we thought, she said before Emily could speak. I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. Emily was in her truck pulling away from the back street behind Voss's building. What happened? Someone ran a formal records request on your name 45 minutes ago. Federal database query. Wilderness rescue certifications. Montana state licensing next of kin records, linking you to Michael Carter. Rosa's voice was controlled, but moving fast. The query originated from inside a DOD IP block, Naval Special Warfare Command. Emily's hands stayed steady on the wheel. Her mind did not. He's verifying who I am. He's verifying what you are, Rosa corrected. He already knows who you are. He's trying to figure out whether you're a problem. He needs to manage quietly, or a problem that requires something else. How long before he has a complete picture? He already has your father's service record, your mother's address in Montana, your current vehicle registration. Emily, he has your plate number. Emily looked in the rearview mirror. The street behind her was ordinary. Nothing following. Nothing that looked like following. But she had been doing wilderness rescue for 8 years, and she knew the difference between a threat that was visible and a threat that was managing its visibility. "I'm changing locations," she said. "Don't call this number after this conversation. Use the secondary." "Already switched," Rosa said. "Listen, the Senate staff contact. Her name is Patricia Okafor. She's been on the Armed Services Committee for 11 years. I've worked with her twice before. She's careful, and she's not connected to anyone in the Nisavbar command structure. I reached out to her an hour ago before I knew Cross had moved. She's available tonight." "How quickly can she act on what we bring her?" "Formally, congressional referrals take time. Informally." A pause. "If what you have is what I think you have, she can make 3 phone calls tonight that will put enough eyes on Cross to limit his ability to move against any of us while the formal process runs." "We need that," Emily said. "The transmission log Reyes is securing it now. He has a cryptographically signed original. He understands the timeline." "Good. What about Reynolds?" "He gave me a written account. First-hand operational names. Cross as undocumented presence on Hollow Reach. States the exfil compromise was internal." Emily stopped at a light. "Rosa Reynolds carried this for 30 years without saying it to anyone. He said it today." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "That's significant. It changes the weight of everything we have," Emily said. "The transmission log proves a transmission was made. Reynolds's account proves the presence and the context. The notebook proves pre-mission awareness of the compromise. Together, they're not a theory, they're a record." "Bring it all tonight," Rosa said. "I'll send you the meeting location on the secondary channel, 8 o'clock. I'll be there." Emily ended the call. She drove 3 blocks, turned twice, parked in a public garage, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the concrete structure with the notebook on her lap. She opened it to the page with her father's circled notation. Cross's name. The careful, deliberate circle around it, drawn by a man who knew what he was writing, who understood that writing it down was a commitment to something he might not be able to complete himself. He had completed it anyway, just not the way he planned. She closed the notebook. She thought about her mother in Montana, who had given her this notebook when she was 12 years old and said, "Your father wanted you to have this. I don't know everything in it. I think he meant for you to figure that out yourself." She took out her phone and called her mother. It rang 4 times. Her mother was always 4 rings, never fewer, never more. And then, M. "Hi, Mom. You sound like you're in a car. Parking garage, actually." Emily leaned her head back against the seat. "Mom, I need to tell you some things. Some of it is hard." Her mother's voice didn't change in pitch or pace. Her mother was a woman who had absorbed the hardest thing imaginable at 31 years old and had built a functional life on the far side of it. Hard news did not dismantle her. It just quieted her in the way that deep water is quiet. "Tell me," Emily told her. "Not everything. Not the operational details. Not the names. Not the specific trajectory of what was moving tonight. But the essential facts. That her father had known about the compromise before the mission. That he had stayed behind specifically to protect his team from something more deliberate than a covered exfil route. That he had been failed not by the mission, or by chance, but by a man who had spent 25 years rising on the back of what he'd done." Her mother listened without interrupting. That was the thing about her mother. She listened the way her father apparently read wind completely and without rushing toward a conclusion. When Emily finished, there was a long silence. Then her mother said, "He knew." "Yes." "He went anyway." "Yes." Another silence. "That's exactly what he would have done." Her voice was not broken. It was something else. The sound of a thing that has been held in one shape for a very long time and has just been allowed carefully to shift into a truer one. "I always felt it, Em. I always felt like the MIA designation was wrong. Not just painful. Wrong. Like a shape that didn't fit the space it was supposed to fill." "I know," Emily said. "Are you safe?" "I'm being careful. That's not what I asked." Emily looked at the notebook in her lap. The man responsible for what happened to Dad is in a position where he can make things difficult. He knows I'm asking questions. But I have what I need, and I have people helping me, and tonight we're going to put it in front of someone who can do something with it. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Reynolds," she said. Not a question. Emily paused. You know his name. Your father mentioned him. In the last call we had before. She stopped, took a breath. Before. He said Reynolds was the best leader he'd ever served under. He said if anything ever happened, Reynolds would do right by the team. A pause. It took him a while. It did, Emily said. But he got there. People do, her mother said, when something makes it impossible not to. A short silence. Your father would be so proud of you. I want you to know that whatever happens tonight. Emily's throat tightened. She held the feeling and let it pass through without stopping it. I know, Mom. Come home when it's done. I will. She ended the call. She sat for another minute in the parking garage, just breathing. Then she got out of the truck, put the notebook inside her jacket, and walked. She didn't go back to the motel. She didn't go anywhere predictable. She found a coffee shop 2 miles from the garage. Busy public, no cameras visible on the exterior. The kind of place that doesn't notice individuals because it's always full of them. And she sat at a corner table with her back to the wall and her coffee untouched and the notebook open in front of her, not reading it, but using it as a focusing object while she ran through the sequence of the night ahead. Her phone buzzed. Secondary channel. A message from Voss. Something you need to see. Sending secure link. She opened the link. It took her to a document scanned old, the corners of the pages visible at the edges of the scan where they'd been laid on the scanner glass. She read the header. It was a personnel action record from 23 years ago, 18 months after Hollow Reach. A formal commendation, classified recommending Harlan Cross for advancement to a senior analytical role within DoD intelligence coordination. The commendation cited, among other things, his participation in a direct action operation in eastern Syria, in which he had demonstrated the specific language was careful and bureaucratic, and revealed everything by revealing nothing exceptional. Situational assessment, and operational adaptability under time-critical conditions. He had been commended for what he did on Hollow Reach, for the thing he did to Michael Carter. Emily stared at the document. Her coffee sat cold beside her. Then her phone rang. Secondary channel. Unknown number, but the area code was New Mexico. Reyes, she said. The log is secured. Victor Reyes's voice was tight and moving fast. 3 encrypted copies, 3 separate locations, none of them connected to my name. The original is... He paused. Emily, I need to tell you something about the log that I didn't tell you this morning because I wasn't sure how to say it. She went still. Tell me now. The 6 words I gave you. Carter knows. Adjust the exfil accordingly. That was the transmission content I've been sitting on for 10 years. What I didn't tell you is that there was a response. The coffee shop noise around her receded to the edges of her awareness. A response, she said, from the external relay cross-transmitted to. It came back 2 minutes later, 4 words. Reyes paused. I didn't include it in the original document I showed Voss, because when I figured out what it meant, what it actually meant, I couldn't make myself attach it to the rest. It felt like... He stopped. It felt like something that deserved to be said separately. To you. Directly. Tell me, she said. Reyes said the 4 words. Emily closed her eyes. She sat in the coffee shop with the noise of other people's ordinary days moving around her, and she held 4 words in her mind, and she understood what they meant with the complete and absolute clarity of someone who has been running a calculation for 25 years and has just received the final number. The 4 words were Carter first, others secondary. She opened her eyes. Cross hadn't just responded to a covered exfil. He hadn't made an in-the-moment calculation about mission risk or operational exposure. He had transmitted her father's name to an external contact, and the external contact, whoever that was, whoever had been running Cross as an asset, whoever sat at the other end of that relay had given a direct order. Target Carter first. The others were secondary. Her father hadn't stayed behind because the choke point forced it, and he made the best call available. He had stayed behind because he had heard the radio traffic. He had heard it, and he had known with the precision of a man who read everything exactly as it was what was coming. And he had put himself between it and his team. Not because the math required it. Because he refused to let anyone else carry that. Reyes, Emily said. Her voice was completely level. She was aware that it was level, and she was aware of what it was costing her to keep it level, and she was also aware that her father would have done the same thing in the same circumstances for the same reason. I need a certified copy of the response transmission as well. The full exchange. Both transmissions time-stamped cryptographic signature intact. It's already packaged, he said quietly. I prepared it this morning. After I talked to you and started understanding what was actually in motion, I went back and packaged it all. I was waiting for you to call again. Send it to Rosa's secure address. She'll know what to do with it. Already sent, he said. Emily, I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took this long, and I'm sorry for the specific thing I just had to tell you. You saved the file, she said. You didn't have to do that. You didn't know what it was. You saved it because you were good at your job, and that's the reason any of this is possible. She paused. That matters. She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Then she opened the notebook to the blank pages in the back. The pages that had always felt to her like they were waiting for something. The pages where she had placed her father's letter after Reynolds gave it to her, and she wrote 4 words in the margin. Not in her father's handwriting. In her own. He knew. He chose. She closed the notebook. Reynolds called at 5:30. Cross requested a meeting with Admiral Hargrove, he said without preamble. This afternoon. It was granted. I don't know the content, but I know the timing. He's trying to get ahead of it, Emily said. Build a narrative before anything surfaces. That's my read. Hargrove is... Reynolds paused. Tom Hargrove is a good man. I've known him for 20 years. But he's also an institutional man. His first instinct when something like this surfaces is to protect the institution, not the record. Cross knows that. Can you get to Hargrove before Cross frames it? I can try. If I call him directly, Cross will know within an hour. But if I don't... He paused. If Cross gets to set the narrative first, then everything we bring tonight lands in a context that's already been shaped against us. Emily thought quickly. Don't call Hargrove, not yet. Let Cross have the meeting. Whatever he tells Hargrove, he's committing to a version of events. When the record contradicts that version, the contradiction matters more than it would have otherwise. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. You're using him against himself. My father used to say the wind is your enemy until you understand it. Then it's the most useful thing on the range. She paused. Let Cross talk. All right. A pause. The meeting tonight, what time? 8. Rosa will send you the location. I'll be there. Reynolds. She stopped him before he could end the call. The commendation. The one Cross received 18 months after Hollow Reach citing his participation in the Syria operation. Silence on his end. You signed it, she said. The silence was longer this time. Who told you? Voss sent me the document. Your signature is at the bottom. She said it without accusation, but without softening it either. The fact was the fact. You recommended him for advancement based on performance in an operation he sabotaged. I didn't know what he'd done, Reynolds said. His voice was rough. I knew he'd been present. The commendation was standard procedure for personnel who participated in classified direct action. I signed it without I didn't know Emily. I believe you, she said. A pause. But Cross did. He knew you signed it. He's kept that in his pocket for 23 years. When this surfaces, he will use it. He'll say you were complicit, that the commendation proves you knew and approved. She paused. You need to be the one who names it first. Tonight in front of Okafor, you need to be the one who says I signed a commendation based on incomplete information. And here is what I have since learned that changes my understanding of what that operation actually was. Reynolds was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of a man who has just measured something heavy and found it manageable, but not light. You're asking me to put my own record on the table alongside Cross's. I'm asking you to tell the truth completely, Emily said, which includes the parts that are uncomfortable for you. That's the only version of this that holds. Another long pause. Your father, Reynolds said finally, was the most honest man I ever served with. Not morally performative, just constitutionally incapable of framing something in a way that wasn't accurate. It used to make the command structure uncomfortable. A short, dry sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You're the same?" "I learned it from a notebook," she said. "I'll be there tonight," he said. All of it on the table. The meeting location was a law office in downtown San Diego. Not Rosa's, not anyone connected to any of them, but a colleague of Rosa's who had handled national security whistleblower cases for 14 years and whose conference room had been used for similar conversations, before the kind that needed 4 walls and no digital footprint before they could become something official. Emily arrived at 7:40. Rosa was already there at the conference table with a laptop and a folder, and the specific expression she wore when she had been doing careful high-stakes work for several hours and was ready to hand it off. Voss arrived at 7:50, carrying nothing visible, but moving with the focused efficiency of someone who has finally, after years of managed caution, decided to stop being careful. Reynolds arrived at 8:02. Patricia Okafor was already seated at the head of the table. She was 54, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have spent their careers sitting across from individuals carrying difficult and important information and have learned to receive it without letting their own reaction contaminate what's being delivered. She looked at each of them as they settled assessing without performing the assessment. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I understand what's at stake. I want you to understand what I can and can't do with what you bring me tonight. I can initiate a formal referral for investigation through oversight channels that sit outside the DoD chain of command. I can make informal contact tonight with people who have the authority and the motive to limit the operational freedom of the subject during the formal process. What I cannot do is move faster than the record justifies. So what I need from you is the record." She looked at Emily. "Ms. Carter, you're the one who put this together. Start from the beginning." Emily opened the notebook. She took out the transmission log, Reyes's certified copy delivered digitally to Rosa and printed in this office an hour earlier. She took out Reynolds's written account. She took out her father's letter. She took out the commendation document Voss had sent. She laid them on the table in the order they belonged in pre-mission mission, aftermath cover ascent. Then she talked. She talked for 40 minutes. Methodically, precisely in the voice she used when she was teaching wilderness navigation, not simplified, not dramatized, just accurate, just the facts placed in their correct relationship to each other. She moved through the timeline without commentary, without emotion in her delivery, letting the record carry what the record was built to carry. Okafor asked 9 questions. All 9 were precise, targeted, the kind of questions that clarify rather than redirect. Reynolds spoke for 12 minutes. He named Cross. He named himself, the commendation, the signature, the incomplete information, and the decision he'd made based on it. He did it without deflection and without excessive apology, which Emily had expected and which Okafor clearly noted. Voss presented the signals log documentation and walked Okafor through the technical provenance in the systematic way of someone who has been preparing to explain this to exactly this kind of audience for years. When they finished, Okafor sat back and removed her reading glasses from the top of her head and placed them on the table. She looked at the documents arranged in front of her. "I want to be direct with you," she said. "What you've brought me tonight is the most substantiated account of deliberate operational betrayal within the Nisabalv community that has come through this office in 11 years. The transmission log alone is remarkable, combined with the pre-mission documentation." She glanced at the notebook. "The fact that your father identified the specific individual 6 weeks prior in a private record that has been in continuous custody through a direct family line that's not circumstantial. That's a timeline of knowing." The room was very quiet. "What I'm going to do tonight," Okafor continued, "is make 2 calls. The first is to the chairman of the Intelligence Oversight Subcommittee. The second is to the DoD Inspector General's office. Not the standard channel, a specific individual I trust to understand what they're receiving and act on it correctly." She looked at Reynolds. "Commander, your written account triggers certain notification requirements under the Whistleblower Protection Act. I want to make sure you understand what that means for your situation." "I understand it," Reynolds said. "I'd like to be covered under it." Okafor nodded. She looked at Emily. "The notebook. I'll need a certified copy for the record, not the original. I understand the original belongs with you, but a complete certified copy." "You'll have it tomorrow morning," Emily said. Okafor looked at all of them around the table. "I want to be honest about what comes next. Cross will be notified that he's under review. He will have legal representation within hours, and that representation will be sophisticated. This process will not be fast, and it will not be easy. And there will be moments when it feels like the institution is protecting itself more than the record." She paused. "But the record you've brought tonight is real. And real records properly placed eventually move things. I've seen it happen. I've made it happen." She put her glasses back on. "So will this." Emily looked at the notebook in her hands, at the documents spread across the table, at the three people around her who had each carried a piece of this for years and had finally in a conference room in San Diego on a Wednesday night put all the pieces in the same place. She thought about a man who had read the wind at a choke point in eastern Syria and made a calculation and chose to be the variable in it so that the others would be safe. She thought about 6 words transmitted in the dark. She thought about 4 words transmitted back. She thought about a notebook given to a 12-year-old girl by a woman who said, "I think he meant for you to figure that out yourself." She thought about a steel plate ringing at 2,847 yards in the morning wind off the Pacific in front of a range full of people who had not expected that sound from that direction. "Thank you," she said to Okafor. To the room. Then her phone buzzed. Secondary channel. A number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. She answered. The voice on the other end was a man's voice. Older, slightly graveled, speaking quietly as though from a place where sound needed to be managed carefully. He said 3 words before she could speak. 3 words that stopped everything. 3 words that changed the shape of every assumption she had carried into that room. He said, "Emily, it's Dad." The room stopped. Not figuratively. Every person around that conference table felt it the specific physical quality of air when something enters it that reorders everything. Rosa's hand stopped moving on her laptop. Voss looked up from the documents. Reynolds went completely still in the way that only happens when a person's nervous system receives information that it has no pre-built category for. Emily did not move. She sat with the phone against her ear, and the voice in it, and the 3 words hanging in the space between that voice and whatever she was before she heard it, and she understood in that moment what her father meant when he wrote that the wind doesn't lie, because this was the wind. Finally, after 25 years, telling her exactly what was true. "Say it again," she said. She said it quietly. Not because she doubted, because she needed to hear it twice, because some things require 2 instances of reality before the body will agree to accept them. "Emily." The voice was older than she'd imagined. Rougher. Carrying the specific texture of years lived under conditions that don't show up on any official record. But underneath the age, underneath the texture, there was something she recognized, the way you recognize a piece of music you've never heard performed but have studied on paper until you know every note. "It's your father." 4 seconds of silence. Then Emily said, "Where are you?" Not "is it really you?" Not "how is this possible?" Just "where are you?" Because that was the operational question. That was the question her father would have asked, and she was in ways she was only beginning to fully account for her father's daughter. "I can't tell you that on this line," he said. "Not yet. I have maybe 4 minutes before this number becomes a liability." A pause. "I've been watching what you've been doing, the last 3 days. I have people, not many, but a few who've been tracking the situation since you arrived in Coronado." Emily's mind was running at a speed that didn't feel like thought anymore. It felt like computation. "You've been alive this whole time?" "Yes." "You've known where we were, Mom and me?" "Yes." "And you chose—" She stopped. She breathed. She set aside the thing that was trying to surface in her chest, and she came back to the operational question, the only question that mattered right now. "Cross. He ordered you targeted. The 4-word response to the transmission. Carter first. Others secondary. A pause that told her he hadn't known she had that. "You have the response transmission," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man recalibrating fast. "We have the full exchange. Time-stamped, cryptographically signed certified copies in 3 secure locations. Emily." Something moved through his voice, not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that had no clean name, because it was the feeling of watching someone do something extraordinary, and knowing at the deepest level that you are part of the reason they could. "Who's in the room with you?" "Reynolds, Voss Rosa, and Patricia Okafor, Senate Armed Services Committee staff." Silence for 2 seconds. "Reynolds is in that room," her father said. "Yes." "And he brought his written account, named Cross, named himself, everything on the table." Another pause. When her father spoke again, his voice had shifted into something she could only describe as the sound of a wall coming down that has been load-bearing for a very long time. "Tell him—" He stopped, started again. "Tell him the debt has been clear for a long time. Tell him I said so." Emily looked at Reynolds across the table. Reynolds was watching her with the expression of a man who understands he is witnessing something he will carry for the rest of his life. "He can hear me," she said into the phone. "I'm putting you on speaker." "Emily, he needs to hear your voice," she said. "Not a message, your voice." A pause. Then, "All right." She put the phone on the table. Michael Carter's voice came into the conference room in San Diego on a Wednesday night, and every person around that table received it differently, but with the same essential quality of attention. The attention you give to something you understand, without needing to be told, is significant beyond what you can immediately calculate. "Dan," the voice said. Reynolds's jaw tightened. He put his hands flat on the table. "Michael." His voice came out rougher than he intended, and he didn't try to correct it. "Michael, don't," Michael Carter said. "There's no time, and it doesn't need to happen that way. You're in that room. That's what it needs to be." Reynolds nodded, though. Michael couldn't see it. It was the nod of someone who has been given something they didn't know they needed, and can't articulate what it is, but understands its weight completely. "I have 2 minutes," Michael said. "Emily, listen carefully. Cross has something I don't think you have yet. A secondary set of documentation from Hollow Reach. He's been holding it as a countermeasure, a version of the after-action that he modified that names me as the source of the mission compromise. It's fabricated, but it's detailed, and it's been in the system for 20 years, and if he deploys it before your record is formally logged, it creates enough confusion to slow everything down." Emily was already looking at Okafor. Okafor was writing. "Where is it?" Emily asked. "Filed under a classified annex to the Hollow Reach after-action report. The annex number is Hotel Romeo 7 Foxtrot. It's not searchable through standard channels. It requires a specific access request from a committee with oversight authority." He paused. "Which you happen to have in that room right now." Emily looked at Okafor. Okafor had already stopped writing and was looking at her phone. "I'm putting in the request now," Okafor said quietly. "HR 7F. If it exists, we'll have access within the hour." "It exists," Michael said. "I've known about it for 15 years. It's one of the reasons I've stayed out. Because surfacing while that document was in place without a counter-record to neutralize it would have handed Cross exactly what he needed." The room absorbed this. Emily absorbed it most of all. She absorbed the full geometry of what her father had just described. A man who had spent 25 years not dead, but invisible, holding his own absence, as the only position from which the record could eventually be corrected, waiting for the precise alignment of circumstances that would allow the truth to surface without being immediately buried by a prepared counter-narrative. Waiting with the patience of someone who had learned patience from the same source she had. From a notebook that said before the decision, "There is no such thing as moving too slowly." "You've been waiting for this," she said. "I've been waiting for the right conditions," he said. "Same thing. And I was the condition." A pause. "You were the person I always knew you'd be," he said. "Walking onto that range, breaking that record, setting this in motion." His voice went quieter. "I couldn't have done it from where I was. I needed someone on the outside who had access to the record credibility within the community, and enough of my instincts to move the pieces in the right sequence. He paused. I needed you. The thing that had been trying to surface in Emily's chest since she first heard his voice pushed upward again. She held it. This was not the moment. The moment would come, and she would be ready for it, but it was not now. 1 minute, her father said. Emily, after tonight, after the formal record is lodged, and HR 7F is flagged, and Cross is under active review, I can surface. There are people who have been holding my situation in place for years, who are ready to move the moment the legal and institutional exposure is managed. He paused. I want to see you. I want to see your mother. There is so much I want that I have not allowed myself to want for 25 years. Emily's hand on the phone was not completely steady. Give me 48 hours, she said. 48 hours, he agreed. And then you come in. Not quiet, not unofficial. All the way in. All the way in, he said. I promise. A pause. Emily. His voice dropped to something that was almost private. Something she understood was for her alone, even in a room full of people. The shot yesterday. I heard about it. A breath. You put it at 2,851 yards. 4 yards past the record. The conditions were good, she said. The conditions were never what mattered, he said. You know that. She did. 48 hours, she said. 48 hours. The line went dead. The conference room was very quiet. Then Voss, who was not a man prone to visible emotion and had managed 11 years of careful, suppressed urgency in the pursuit of this exact truth, put his face in his hands. Not crying. Just the private physical response of a person who has been holding something at arm's length for so long that when it finally resolves, the body registers the release before the mind can. Reynolds was looking at the phone on the table. His expression was the clearest Emily had seen it, stripped of every professional layer, every managed presentation, showing the face of a man in his 60s who has just been handed back something he thought he'd lost forever and cannot immediately identify what to do with the size of that. Rosa was typing, fast, precise, translating what she'd just heard into the sequence of actions it required, which was the most useful thing she could do, and she knew it. Okafor was on her phone, moving toward the corner of the room, speaking quietly into it, with the controlled urgency of someone who is making the calls she said she would make, and doing it without delay. Emily picked up her father's notebook from the table. She held it. She thought about a 12-year-old girl in Montana who had opened this notebook for the first time sitting on the floor of her mother's closet, where the box had been kept, and read the first page. A rifle is never about power. It is about patience, discipline, and the person holding it, and had not known exactly what it meant, but had understood at some deep pre-verbal level that it was meant for her specifically, that it was a set of instructions written by someone who understood what she would need before she knew she needed it. She had spent 15 years learning to shoot. She had spent 18 months reconstructing the record. She had driven to Coronado with a rifle and a notebook and walked onto a range where nobody expected her, and she had put a round through a plate at a distance nobody thought she could reach, and she had done it not to prove something to the people watching, but to set in motion the only sequence of events that could bring her to this room with these people on this night. Her father had known. He had known that the shot would reach Reynolds, that Reynolds would reach Voss, that the record once assembled would reach Okafor, that the formal process once initiated would remove Cross's ability to manage the exposure. He had known all of it the way he had known wind at a choke point in Syria, not through certainty, but through the complete, patient, disciplined accumulation of every relevant variable, calculated and recalculated, until the solution was as close to certain as anything in this world ever gets. He had taught her to read wind. She had learned to read everything else from the same source. The next 48 hours moved fast and slow in the way that things do when they are simultaneously logistical and enormous. Okafor's 2 calls that night became 6 by midnight and 14 by morning. The HR-7FX was flagged by 9 a.m. The following day, it existed exactly where Michael Carter said it was. It contained exactly what he said. It contained, and the metadata on the document showed that it had been modified 14 months ago, within weeks of Cross's appointment to deputy director. which meant Cross had updated his counter-narrative when he took the job, which meant he had been actively managing the exposure even while ascending to the position from which he'd been managing it. Okafor told Emily this on the phone at 9:15 Thursday morning, and her voice carried the specific quality of a person delivering news that is both exactly what they expected and more significant than they had allowed themselves to fully anticipate. "The modification timestamp is the cleanest piece of evidence we have," Okafor said. "It proves ongoing active concealment, not just a historical event. That changes the legal exposure significantly." "When does he get notified?" Emily asked. "The formal notification goes out this afternoon. He'll have counsel within the hour after that. But by the time notification goes out, the committee chair and 2 ranking members will already have been briefed, and the Inspector General's office will have a full package." A pause. "He won't be able to move the document. He won't be able to move against any of you. The formal process has enough momentum now that interference would compound the exposure rather than reduce it. And his position: administrative leave pending review effective with notification." Okafor's voice was steady and fine. "He's done, Emily. The process will take time, but the outcome is not in question. Not with what we have." Emily held the phone and looked at the notebook on the table in front of her. At the cover, worn soft with handling. At the spiral binding slightly bent on the left side from years of being open to the same pages. "Thank you," she said. "Thank your father," Okafor said. "He documented it when he was the only one who could." Reynolds called at noon. "Hargrove wants to meet," he said. "He was briefed this morning by the committee chair's office. He's Emily. Tom Hargrove is a good man. When he understood what had been sitting inside his command, what he had approved without knowing what he was approving." Reynolds stopped. "He wants to talk to you." "I'll meet him," Emily said. "He also—" Reynolds paused. "He asked me to ask you something. About the record board at Coronado." "What about it?" "He wants to know what name you want on it." Emily was quiet for a moment. "2 names," she said. "Mine and my father's. Same line, same distance." Reynolds didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I'll tell him." "Reynolds." She stopped him before he could hang up. "When this is finished, when the formal process runs, and the record is corrected, and my father comes in, I want you to be there. Not officially, just there." A pause. "I'll be there," he said. Thursday night, 47 hours after the phone call, in the conference room. Emily's secondary channel buzzed with a single message from a number she now recognized. "Tomorrow morning. Billings Airport. 6:40 arrival. Terminal B." She called her mother. Her mother answered on the 4th ring. "Mom," Emily said. "He's coming home." The sound her mother made was not a word. It was something older than words, something that came from below language, from the part of a person where the things that matter most are stored without being named. It lasted only a moment. Then her mother's voice came back, steady, quiet. The voice of a woman who had been maintaining the shape of a life with something essential missing from it for 25 years, and was only now in a single phone call on a Thursday night being told that the missing thing was coming back. "What time?" her mother asked. 6:40, Terminal B." Emily paused. "Can you drive to Billings tonight?" "I'm already packing," her mother said. Emily drove through the night. 14 hours from San Diego to Billings, through the desert and the high country and the long emptiness of the western interior, where the sky is enormous and the road is straight and the wind moves across everything with the absolute impartial honesty. Her father had spent his life learning to read and had tried to teach her through 60 pages of handwritten notes in a spiral notebook. She drove with the notebook on the passenger seat. She didn't play music. She didn't need to fill the silence. She had spent her whole life in silence that was full of things. The silence of the mountains she trained, in the silence of the firing line. The silence of the conference room, when her father's voice came through the phone. She knew how to be in silence that meant something without needing to translate it into noise. She thought about the shot. 2,851 yards. 4 yards past Reynolds's record. The conditions had been good but not perfect. The wind at the mid-range flags had been disagreeing with the wind at the target end. The argument her father described in the notebook as the most honest conversation you'll ever overhear. She had given it time. She had read it until she understood what it was saying. And then she had fired, and the plate had rung, and the sound had reached her 3 seconds later, across the distance, arriving like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. She thought about what her father said on the phone. The conditions were never what mattered. Howe was right. She had learned to shoot in Montana in weather that made Coronado's conditions look accommodating at distances she set for herself, because the notebook told her that comfortable distances produce comfortable shooters, and comfortable shooters miss when it counts. The conditions at Coronado had been good, but she would have made the shot in worse ones. She had made similar shots in worse ones alone in the mountains with no one watching and nothing on the board to break. The record was never the point. The record was the key. She had known that when she loaded the truck into Montana and drove to California. She had known it the way she knew her father's handwriting from deep, repeated, careful study that eventually becomes something more than knowledge. Something that lives in the body. The point was a conference room in San Diego, and 3 people and a phone call, and a 48-hour sequence that ended a 25-year lie. The record was just the thing that opened the door. She reached Billings at 5:45 in the morning. Her mother was at the airport already sitting in the arrivals area with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and the expression of someone who is holding herself very carefully because she understands that the next hour is going to require everything she has. She looked up when Emily came through the door, and they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. Then Emily sat down beside her, and her mother put one hand over hers on the armrest between the seats, and they sat that way in the arrivals area of Billings-Logan International Airport, as the airport filled slowly around them, with the ordinary movement of ordinary Thursday becoming Friday, and they waited. At 6:38, the arrivals board updated. Flight status landed. Emily's mother's hand tightened on hers. Emily did not look at the board. She looked at the door from the secure area, the door that passengers came through, the door that opened and closed and opened again as people arrived into the arms of people who had been expecting them. She watched that door with the patience she had learned from a notebook and the discipline she had built across 15 years of mornings on the mountain, and the specific focused stillness of a person at the firing line who understands that everything has been prepared and all that is left is to wait for the right moment and not rush it. The door opened. A man came through it. He was 61 years old, and he walked with a slight asymmetry on the left side that was the permanent signature of something that had happened to him in a place that was never officially documented. He had her eyes. He had gray at his temples and deep lines at the corners of his eyes, and the particular way of moving through space that belongs to people who have spent their lives paying very close attention to their surroundings. He stopped when he saw them, 3 seconds. He looked at Emily's mother first. 25 years of distance compressed into 3 seconds of looking, and then he moved forward, and Emily's mother stood, and they came together in the middle of the arrivals area in a way that was not performed for the space around them, but simply true. The truth of 2 people who had been separated by the worst possible circumstances and had remained on both sides of that separation, faithful to something that most people would have given up on years earlier. Emily stood. She stood, and she watched her father hold her mother for a long moment. Then he looked at her over her mother's shoulder. He looked at her the way she had looked at the wind flags at Coronado, with complete focused, unhurried attention-taking in everything, reading the details, understanding the full picture of what was in front of him. He said her name, just her name. Just Emily, with the particular weight of a word that has been held in a person's mouth for 25 years, and is finally on a Friday morning in Montana being released. She crossed the space between them, and she understood in the moment her father's arms came around her. For the first time, what it means when the wind stops arguing with itself, and finally, from every direction, at once, tells you the truth. 6 weeks later, the record board at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado was updated. The name at the top read E. Carter, M. Carter, 2, 851 yards. Below it in smaller text, the range officer on duty had added something that was not standard protocol, but that Admiral Hargrove had personally approved, first documented father-daughter record. Coronado, November. Harlan Cross's administrative leave became a formal criminal referral within 30 days of Emily's meeting with Okafor. The HR 7F Annex was officially flagged as a falsified document, the modification timestamp standing as the clearest evidence of what it was. Cross's legal team was sophisticated, and the process was slow, the way Okafor had said it would be, but the outcome was not in question. The institution moved the way institutions move, when the record is real and the people holding it refuse to let go. Not fast, not gracefully, but completely. Reynolds retired with his full record intact. The commendation he had signed, noted in his official file as having been obtained through deliberate misrepresentation by the subject. He spent the first month of his retirement writing letters to the families of other men he had served with to the people he had meant to reach, and hadn't to the addresses he had kept in a drawer for longer than was reasonable. Accumulating with the patient weight of things he had been unable to make himself do, until the one thing that had been holding him back was finally irreversibly gone. Victor Reyes came back from New Mexico. He gave a formal deposition to the IG's office that ran 6 hours, and was by every account the most complete signals. Intelligence account of Hollow Reach that had ever existed in any official record. Afterward he went home, made coffee, and called Voss for the first time in 3 years, and they talked for 2 hours about nothing related to any of it. Arthur Voss closed the document wall in his dining room. He did it carefully, taking each piece down in the reverse order. He had put it up, preserving the sequence, filing it all in a labeled box that went into a closet. Not because it no longer mattered. Because it was no longer his to carry. It had been placed in the right hands, and the right hands were moving it, and his job, the job he had given himself when the system failed to do it, was finished. He stood in the empty dining room afterward, and put a table where the folding work surface had been, and ate dinner there for the first time in 4 years. Michael Carter moved back to Montana. Not immediately. There were processes, formal and informal, that required time and presence, and the particular patience of someone re-entering a world that had officially recorded his absence for a quarter century. His status was corrected through a joint effort between the IG's office and the Department of Defense Personnel Records Division that took 31 days and produced at the end of it a document that corrected the record from missing in action, presumed lost to survived classified operation status, withheld pending formal review, now resolved. It was not a perfect document. Official documents rarely are. But it was accurate, and accuracy was what he had always asked of things. He came back to the house in Montana on a Tuesday in December, when the mountains had their first real snow, and the air had the clarity that comes when cold and altitude meet, and he stood on the front porch with his wife and his daughter, and looked at the range that Emily had built behind the property over the years, the targets at increasing distances, the wind flags she had made herself from materials in the barn, the notebook-sized weatherproof box mounted on the post near the firing position where she kept her father's calculations protected from the elements. He looked at the flags. They were moving from the northwest, steady and honest in the way that wind in Montana. In December is steady and honest, not the complicated multi-directional argument of the range at Coronado, but a single clear voice coming from one direction, saying one thing exactly as it was. He looked at Emily. "Good flags," he said. She had spent 15 years building those flags, setting them at the intervals he had specified in the notebook, maintaining them with the same care she gave to the rifle, and the calculations, and every other element of a practice that she had built alone from a notebook in the patient faith that what she was building was for something even in the years when she couldn't see exactly what. She handed him the notebook. He looked at the cover. At the wear on it, the soft suppleness of the binding that came from 15 years of daily handling. He turned it over in his hands and opened it to the first page and read the first line in his own handwriting, and something moved through his face that Emily had no name for, but understood completely. He turned to the blank pages at the back. He saw his letter folded and placed there by Emily after Reynolds gave it to her. He saw the 4 words Emily had written in the margin in her own hand. He knew. He chose. He looked at her. "You understood," he said. "I read the notebook," she said. "Every page, 1,000 times." He turned to a blank page. He took a pen from his jacket pocket, The same pen she realized he had used in the notebook. Originally a specific type military-issue ballpoint, the kind that worked in cold, and he wrote something on the blank page. He turned the notebook to show her. He had written, "The wind brought you here. You brought me home." Emily looked at the words. She looked at her father. She took the notebook back and held it against her chest for a moment, the way you hold something that contains everything you've needed and everything you've earned and everything that was always true before you could prove it. The flags moved in the northwest wind, steady and clear and without argument. And Michael Carter, standing on a porch in Montana, in December, 25 years after the night he made the only choice he could make at a choke point in the dark. Alive home, his daughter beside him, the record corrected and the debt paid, and the lie, finally completely and permanently over, took a breath of cold air that tasted like the beginning of something. He had taught her that the wind always tells you what's true, and the wind on this Tuesday morning in December had only one thing to say. It said, "You're home." And that was exactly what they both were.